Just a few days ago, we finally got in our hands Rage 2, put out by ID Software and Avalanche. Let's take a look at whether or not it's fun and worth your time to pick up. Let's get started with settings and controls. I will say right off the bat that there are a lot of settings, a lot of controls, a lot of keys you need to bind as a keyboard and mouse player. For starters, you have weapons on 1 through 0. That makes 10 different weapons available for play. In the early stages, this is not a problem. 1 for your pistol, 2 for your machine gun, 3 for a shotgun, 4 for a rocket launcher, and you're pretty much all set to go. But once you start moving on throughout the game and unlocking more and more and more things, reaching your hand to 5, 6, 7, and beyond is just not really feasible for people with average-sized hands. Now, I'm taller, I have bigger hands than normal. I can reach 5 and 6 and even 7 without too much struggle, 8 if I flex a little bit, and then beyond that, like 9 and 0 are just completely out of my reach unless I start swinging my thumb or something like that. So, the game pretty much forces you to either use one of two options to select your weapons, either by holding Q by default, which will enable you to pause the game and bring up a weapon wheel where you can select the weapon you want, or you can very, very inaccurately scroll through your weapons with the scroll wheel. Now, I strongly recommend that you do not do that because it's really hard in the heat of a moment to make exactly 2 clicks to go from your pistol to your shotgun, right? That's not an easy thing to do in combat. You might accidentally do 1 or 3 and go to the wrong gun entirely, potentially blowing yourself up with a rocket launcher. So, I can't recommend using mouse wheel. My issue, though, with the controls and setup as they are by default is that you're completely unable to bind actions directly to mouse wheel up or down. Say, for example, that I want my rocket launcher to be on scroll wheel up, and I want my shotgun to be on scroll wheel down. So that way I can flick that thing as hard as I want. I can do 1 click, 10 clicks, doesn't matter. Every time that mouse scroll wheel moves up, I'm getting a rocket launcher, or every time it's down, I'm a shotgun, or whatever other action you may want. You're not able to bind those things for a reason that is unbeknownst to me. So that is a huge downside of the controls. Also, you have these magical abilities, these powers that you have. I'm not going to use the real names because if you're watching this review, you have never played the game, you don't care what the names are. So basically, you have this ability that you'll see me using where my left hand is kind of shaking in front of my face. This is kind of like a wall hack ability. This is like a primer ability. So you hold this button down, and then you can press one of 4 modifier buttons that you bind to use one of your 4 distinct skills. Now, you can bind them directly as a quick cast, but again, I don't really recommend this unless you unbind your weapons completely and you put the abilities on 1, 2, 3, and 4. But this is kind of beyond the point and a little bit more in-depth than I'm looking to get for a review of the game. So if you guys want to see, like, just if you do decide to buy the game based upon this review, how you should best set up your controls and how to play the game better on keyboard and mouse, because by default, the controls, in my opinion, are a complete mess, let me know in the comments, and I'd be happy to put something like that together if the demand is there. But let's just call off this little bit of a rant for now by saying that, again, the controls are just not perfect as they are by default, and well, there's just so many of them that as a brand new player who has never picked up Rage 2 before you even start the game, if you just go to the controls settings screens, it's just such a mass of potential actions that you can keybind that it's hard to know what's important and what's not and where things should really go. You have to kind of figure that out while you're playing. And by the time you figure that out while you're playing, you kind of doesn't really even matter anymore. You're just so far into the game and so invested that you're just kind of are going to say to yourself, screw it, and just leave things imperfect and just finish the game and then kind of probably not come back. So, meh. The controls as they are, not great. But let's move on. We have some UI stuff going on here where there's a constant intrusion of pop-ups as tutorials near the start of the game. So it seems like every couple 100 meters that you run, a new pop-up is coming in saying, hey, you can do this thing, you can do that thing, press this button for this, press tab to go to your menu to do that. And it's just, it's nice to a point, but there comes to be a moment where you get this so often and it's so intrusive to gameplay that, again, it is just frustrating and takes you out of the experience, it takes you out of the fun. And this is going to be a core theme of Rage 2 throughout the entirety of this video. From what I've read so far, accessibility settings as well don't seem to be up to snuff for most people. There's no brightness, no contrast, no gamma sliders. There is no colorblind mode. Subtitles are not done correctly for people who actually need them from what I'm reading online. Apparently, there are too many words per line. Apparently, there should be a black backing behind the letters and the ability to change the size of the font to make it more accessible for people who need them. So that is a small downside, but then again, if you're a person who is watching this video, you're probably not amongst that demographic because I do not subtitle my videos, so don't really take the game too negatively for that reason if you're watching this, but just be aware that it is a thing. If you're someone who does like the subtitles or who does need colorblind stuff, they may not be as customizable or as perfect as you may like. Next up, let's talk about the world, exploration, just everything that you're going to find in Rage 2. Characters, most notably just the random rabble of NPCs throughout cities, are weird, they're gross, they're strange, beyond the point of being funny in a lot of cases. There's a line that they could have straddled here, where everyone is out there, but they're funny for it, or they're interesting for it. Unfortunately, not all, but a lot of the characters are so far gone, and they're just so whacked out that it makes you cringe and not want to interact with them at all. Not that you can in many instances anyways, but just be aware. This isn't to say that the game is without any laughs, though. There's plenty of legitimately chuckle-inducing moments, be it the character actions, characters fighting, just the names of every single NPC you find. Some of the names are legitimately very funny. And some of the characters that you actually talk to and actually interact with are plenty well made, designed, and voiced. It's just that there's a lot of rabble in this game. Whatever disgust that the developers were trying to instill in me as a player, whatever dislike for the random people inhabiting this world that they tried to put into me, the developers absolutely nailed that, but I'm not sure that it's something to be praiseworthy or not. They did a good job at making me hate their characters, and I don't know if that was the intention. It almost feels like it was. Moving forward, exploration and activity diversity feels a lot like Mass Effect Andromeda. Well, for better or worse. I mean, I liked Andromeda, but most people didn't, so take that for what it is. Technically, there are a lot of tasks for you to do, but they are, admittedly, pretty samey, and don't make you feel like you're actually accomplishing anything. You're just making the mostly dead post-apocalyptic world a little bit more dead, instead of a little bit more alive. Instead of different planets with the exact same activities on each one like you'd find in Andromeda, you just have different biomes that you get to by driving. There's sand, sand, more sand, with your first taste of actual green not coming until you venture all the way north, which seems to be kind of an endgame zone with much higher level activities than anywhere else in the game. In order to get from point A to point B, lots of driving is of course required, one of the main selling points for Rage 2 and one of the main comparison points between this game and Mad Max. Now, the driving, in my opinion, would be fine if it controlled well at all. Now, asterisk, I have not played on a controller, so maybe it works fine on a controller, but for keyboard and mouse, I don't feel like anything handles appropriately in this game. The biggest difficulties for me are twofold, and this may be a little bit difficult to explain, but I'm going to try my best. The first one would be the fact that your aiming point and your driving direction are not completely separated. So the best way to explain it is that I would like the game's vehicles to handle with tank-style controls. Like, for example, going back all the way to Halo 1, where if you have a Scorpion tank in Halo 1, you move your left stick in whatever direction, that's the way the tank moves. But your aim point, your tank turret, does not move with the body, right? Those two pieces move independently, and you have to control each one. So left stick is movement, right stick is aim, just like it is for every other part of a first-person shooter. When you move left and right on your left thumbstick, your character just moves that direction, but it doesn't churn your aim. When you're driving a car, strafing left and right is how you turn your car. So that means your mouse input is purely to aim the guns, and it does not influence where your car goes, which is fine, but why is it that turning your car influences your aim when your aim doesn't influence your car? It's just like, there's this weird crossover of what controls do what that make handling incredibly difficult for me personally. This may not be a problem for you, but it is very problematic for me. Secondly, and this is less of an issue, there's just a bit of a learning curve with the cars, which I guess isn't really a complaint, but it's just something that you need to be aware of. It was really hard for me to learn to drive at first, but there's two things that I think are really important, and those are the usage of your handbrake and being careful with your boost and not just spamming it at all times, but understanding that your boost will take you from 0 to pretty decent speed pretty quickly. So using your handbrake to corner a little bit more effectively and feathering that boost as well to kind of keep your car pulsing in the direction that you want seems to be one of the better ways to drive to me, but it takes a little bit of practice to get used to, so just keep that in mind. It's not a complaint, just it is what it is. Next up we have combat. This is the game's only saving grace in my opinion, and unfortunately there is just not really enough of it. Fights are short-lived and very compartmentalized, with long strings of talking, listening, skill tree managing, and driving taking you away from the one part of the game that's actually fun, the shooting. Luckily, ammo is plentiful, but guns feel like they simply don't do any damage at the start of the game. The fact that I have to blast a regular-looking guy with regular-looking armor 3 times at point blank with a shotgun to kill him off is just a little bit hard for me to swallow, especially in a title co-developed by ID Software. Most guns you find in the early game are pretty horribly inaccurate too. The shotgun in particular is just a huge sticking point for me, again, because id Software game. Shotgun should be best. It's id. The shotgun feels weak, at least in the early game. But all the other starting guns feel even weaker. The pistol and assault rifle in the early game, before a lot of upgrades started flowing, felt really, really pointless, and very inaccurate to boot. At nearly no point during combat in the early game did I feel particularly powerful, at least not until I got 2 particular offensive abilities, one being this ability called Shatter. It's like this super melee attack. There's another one which is like a jump slam. It's like an AoE attack. Until I got those abilities and got them upgraded pretty much all the way, I felt super weak. But once I got those, I realized those abilities give knockdowns, they strip a lot of armor, and they make my guns proper finishing tools as opposed to main weapons. They're just there to fill in while your abilities are on cooldown, I feel like. The abilities are what do your damage. The guns just fill in, maybe they pick a couple people off here and there, maybe they finish a target off, but your main weapons seems to be all of your arc abilities. Now, against weaker factions, sure, your guns do feel effectual, and you will eventually start to feel properly powerful against harder factions once you spend a lot of upgrade points, which I guess is the point of the upgrade path throughout the game, but it just doesn't feel great a lot of the time. Melee feels very slow and very animation locked, with no indication whether or not your melee will kill a target outright. Compared to Doom 2016, which has the most comparable combat to this game, also being just an id game, melee attacks had a tell. When it would finish off a target, you would see your enemies flash red. Now you have to guess, and if you guess wrong, you're going to get punched back, probably, and just punished for even trying. It makes me not even want to attempt melees unless I have a target knocked down on the ground and I know that they can't hit me back before my very long melee recovery time completes. Because a lot of the combat feels so, well, built around abilities and built around these cooldowns, there's a lot of fights in the game, namely high-level fights against boss kinds of enemies that don't feel super engaging. They don't feel super hard. It's just like you need to time your dash ability and your other abilities and just make sure that you do like a couple little patterns right and then you're gonna win. It's like very simple 1990s boss patterns, like from old style games where bosses just had a few attacks, and as you reached certain health thresholds on them, they would get more aggressive or get new attacks or whatever. It's basically that, but it doesn't feel rewarding to learn the pattern and then play around it. It just feels like, well, you have to do this one thing. It's really easy to do. Maybe you'll die once learning it, and then you're fine and you're done and you just move on. There's just like, there's no difficulty there. It just isn't very fun. Like, for example, let's take a look at authority sentries. I'm not even really going to narrate this. I'm just going to go ahead and show you a clip of me fighting an authority sentry in the most optimal way possible. And I'll let you decide whether or not this is a fun and engaging fight or not. Next up, let's talk about upgrades, and then we'll move into our final thoughts. Upgrades in Rage 2 don't work in the sense of making a character build. You're not going to make one who is really into the arc abilities and then do a new playthrough where you have a character who's really, really into the guns. It just doesn't work that way. You have so many separate tracks of where your upgrade points come from. It's not like a single XP pool. You just have all these different resources that go specifically into compartments of upgrading your character, that you're always going to have a pretty good balance of arc abilities, of character upgrades in general, of vehicle upgrades, of weapon upgrades. You know, you're going to have all that stuff building up very equally over time. Your power level is going to rise pretty much the same across the board, given, you know, a few hours of play. So don't worry about trying to specialize or pick a build that suits you, because that doesn't really exist in this game. All you're going to be doing is going from point A to point B. Maybe you'll go there in a straight line, maybe you'll veer a little bit left or right, but you're going to be getting from zero crappy version of your main character all the way to hero in pretty much the same amount of time, the same amount of effort. No matter how you play, no matter what you do, you're going to get there in pretty much the same pace. Again, there's no builds, there's no specializations, there's no optimizations. It's just the only difference between you and another player is which order you choose to unlock things. Maybe you'll choose to focus your Feltrite a little bit more into upgrading your guns first. Maybe you'll choose to focus on your abilities a little bit. But overall, things are gonna feel pretty samey across the board. All in all, despite the constant droning interludes and the lack of fun associated with driving, the combat is so close to being good that I keep finding myself wanting to go back and try to get better and better at it in order to do more and more crazy things. The freedom of movement, the abundance of movement abilities, and the immense combo potential keeps the game afloat for me. There is potential there. It feels like Doom 2016 plus in some ways with how the combat seems like it should feel on paper. But to be honest, I think I would rather have Doom 2016 combat overall with less wild and crazy stuff and that core experience just feeling and looking so much better. Now, I don't regret my purchase of the deluxe edition of Rage 2. I know I'm going to get plenty more hours of play from this game, despite the fact that this video was kind of mostly negative. My dollars spent to entertainment received ratio is high enough to stop me from complaining about this game too much. Just identifying the weaknesses, but it's still entertaining enough to play, I guess. But if money's tight for you and you don't have 60 to 80 bucks just to throw at a game because, maybe it's fun, and you're not sure whether or not you want to try Rage 2 based upon the gameplay you've seen today, here's my advice for you. If you're on console, this is a rental. Otherwise, for both PC and console players, this is an on-sale only purchase for sure. I don't feel like there's a whole lot of replayability in this game. If you approach it from a completionist standpoint on your first playthrough, you'll experience everything that the game has to offer. Again, there is no build variety, really, in this game. It's very minor and not worth worrying about. It's just the order in which you choose to go from zero to hero. This isn't a bad thing at all. It just is what it is. All in all, while this is not my favorite game ever, or even really a memorable one, I at least got my money's worth, so I am satisfied. Stick to shorter play sessions instead of trying to binge this game, and I think you'll have at least a little bit of fun with it as well. If I were 14 and renting this game, I would absolutely love it. But as a full price paying adult that's seen this sort of game before, I can't in good faith say that I'm impressed. Above average, but not stand out, and barely above average, Rage 2 is fine. Thank you so much for watching. I hope that you've learned something new. If you guys want to see more videos like this, make sure you comment down below and let me know. Otherwise, maybe we won't. Who knows? I'll see you guys again very soon.